The rights of Indigenous people and tribes people around the world is often hitting the media headlines, and here to discuss more is a particular organisation called Survival. It is the only organisation working for tribal people's rights worldwide, and from Survival is Tess Thackara, who's coordinator for Survival International USA. Tess, thanks for joining us on Track 180. Tell us a little bit more about the work of Survival.
Well, Survival International is an international human rights group. We've been fighting for tribal people's rights since 1969. What we do is basically to publicize human rights violations committed against tribal peoples around the world. And our work is focused specifically on tribes that stand to lose the most, which are usually the ones that have had the least contact with the outside world. We work to dispel the idea that tribal peoples are primitive, backward, from the Stone Ages, all those kind of negative terms that are very often used to describe tribal peoples.
What are people most unaware of about tribal people, do you find, as an organisation?
We estimate there are about 100 uncontacted tribes in the world, and people really don't know they're out there. And it's a problem that people don't know they're out there because they are threatened by companies and governments seeking to extract resources on their land. And if people don't know they're there, then they can't help them and lobby governments and companies to stay away and respect their rights and respect their right to stay on their land.
Do you think that things like blockbuster films like Avatar help to raise people's awareness?
I do, yeah. And actually, Avatar was incredibly helpful last year in one of our campaigns surrounding a tribe called the Dongria Khond, who live in the east of India in a place called Niyamgiri, in a very remote and beautiful area of the country. They live on a mountain. They worship the mountain like a god. That tribe became known as the Avatar tribe last year, and they went on to successfully block a massive mine that was threatening them. So it's really incredible to see a tribe actually succeed in that way, and I think Avatar helps substantially with that.
Slightly controversial question. Why should we really care about tribal people?
Well, I mean, I think if we as a society care about human rights at all, then we should care about not seeing a whole people get completely wiped out because of the commercial interests of a company, commercial interests of governments. And we've seen historically, after first contact, an uncontacted tribe be decimated by about 50%. That's actually common. And I think aside from us just caring about human rights, we have a lot to learn from tribal peoples. And, you know, they serve as a reminder to us that there are other ways to live.
Let me ask you this question from a legal standpoint. Do tribes actually own lands, and what's the legal ramifications behind that for when corporations move in and try to clear the land that they occupy?
Yeah. Well, we actually have a campaign on ILO 169, which is an international law, and that is a law that basically establishes Indigenous people's rights to ownership of land. We're actually encouraging countries to ratify that law because although we have the UN Declaration on Indigenous Peoples, which sets a very good standard for respecting Indigenous people's human rights, it's not actually legally binding. Currently, only, I think, 22 countries have ratified it. The United States has not ratified it.
So just to be clear then, at this moment in time, until there is an international agreed law dependent on where those Indigenous people are in the world, they may or may not have the protection of the law and the courts of that country.
Right. And I mean, we have had some very important precedents set. For example, in Botswana, we have a big campaign for the Bushmen of Botswana who have faced a policy from the Botswanan government of persecution for couple of decades now. They were forced off their land in a series of evictions. And the Bushmen actually took the Botswana government to court. And in 2006, they won a landmark ruling that said they had the right to return to their land. Their right was based in the idea that it was their ancestral land, they'd been there for thousands of years. And then the government told them, well, actually, you can live there, but you can't access water there, which obviously was a very narrow interpretation of that ruling. So very recently, the Bushmen took the government to court again over their right to access water, and they won.
Fairly recently, Survival issued photographs of a tribe that had been living in isolation for a long time. How does the organisation feel and the tribe feel about now being presented to the world?
We have to tread a fine line between publicising the existence of tribal peoples enough that the world knows they're out there, that they care about their survival, and that they support them and campaign for their rights, while also not publicising their exact whereabouts and not encouraging people to go in there.
Last question I want to put to you, and thank you for your time today, Tess, is quite simply this. If people who are watching this want to get involved, they want to help make a difference like Survival is doing, how do they do that?
Well, first of all, I would encourage anyone interested in these issues to sign up for our monthly e-news, in which we send out regular appeals directing people to write letters to their senators, to their governments, to companies that are exploiting tribal peoples in some way. Public opinion is the greatest force for change, and the more people that know about these issues and feel strongly about them and really get behind tribal peoples, you know, it does have an effect on the ground.
Tess Thacker from Survival International USA, thank you ever so much for joining us on Track 180 today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.